So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out. We're reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have morality on obedience, have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyessa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives jurisprudence guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. Yeah. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Friday, TGIF. It's just, what an incredible day. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. So much going on. Senator Bernie Sanders will be with us at the top of the next hour at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time here. Roger Stone was just indicted. Now we see that there was a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud to elect Donald Trump and Mike Pence as president and vice president. Is it possible, if there's any lawyers listening to me right now, particularly if you are familiar with constitutional law, you know, there's a doctrine or practice or whatever the appropriate word is that says that when somebody commits a fraud and is convicted of that fraud, that the fruits of that fraud are taken away from them. Right? I mean, you know, it's very clear, right? You rip somebody off, they get their money back and it comes out of your pocket. So if Donald Trump and Mike Pence are in the White House as a consequence of a clear fraud, one that apparently involved the foreign government as well, Russia in this case, if they're in office as a consequence of a fraud, is it possible that Hillary Clinton or the Clinton campaign could sue at the Supreme Court alleging fraud and asking that they be installed in the White House by way of taking away the fruit of that fraud from Donald Trump? Now, I realize this is like really reaching out there, but I'm just saying, it seems to me like this might work. If you have thoughts on this, if you have an opinion, let us know. It is Anything Goes Friday. Whatever you want to talk about, feel free to give us a shout. A couple of data points that I want to share with you about Roger Stone and all this stuff. October 7th was the day that WikiLeaks first did their document dump on Hillary Clinton's, October 7th, 2016, on Hillary Clinton's emails. It's also the day that the Access Hollywood tape was released. I do not think that's a coincidence. This horrible news about Donald Trump comes out. He's bragging about grabbing women by their crotch. And within hours, WikiLeaks releases all this information that Roger Stone had predicted. In fact, Roger Stone later claimed credit for having correctly predicted it would be October 7th. Right. Okay, in addition, yesterday, Claire McCaskill just kind of laid out Donald Trump is lying. And Donald Trump, you know, I mean, he just flat out lied yesterday. It's pretty amazing, really. You know, he said that the reason why that six Republican senators voted with the Democrats to reopen the government, that the reason why that happened, according to Donald Trump, is that they wanted hurricane relief. Remember this? I mean, he came right out and said this. Oh, yeah, there were six Republicans who voted with the Democrats because they wanted hurricane relief. Those Republican senators, as Claire McCaskill pointed out, were from Alaska. Where was the hurricane in Alaska? Colorado, Tennessee, Utah, Maine, and Georgia. So, you know, is he going to be held to account for this lie? So, you know, what do we do with that? I mean, that's pretty astonishing. So, you know, what's the deal with this? Other news. I mean, there's just a pile of stuff here I want to go through real quickly. And we are, by the way, if you're trying to call in, we're having to reboot our entire phone system here. So you're going to, if you're on hold, you're going to get dumped. If you're calling in, you won't be able to get through. Just try again in about 4 minutes, because right now we're rebooting everything. Apparently had a Comcast problem overnight. So Trump, this Andy Borowitz, this is hysterical. A furious Donald Trump told reporters on Friday morning that it was a total disgrace that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had apparently not been affected by the government shutdown. See, Trump apparently thought that, you know, the shutdown put the FBI out of it. He says, you have people across the country in national parks and places like that who are not at work, and somehow the FBI is working around the clock. I think that's a total disgrace. Let's say you were trying to leave the country in a hurry with your family. Would the FBI be at the airport to stop you? What good is this shutdown anyway? That's Borowitz, of course, in the New Yorker satire. But, you know, meanwhile, there's a bunch of fascinating stuff around this. And the shutdown as well. You know, yesterday was the day that Wilbur Ross said, oh, gee, you know, why can't these government workers simply get a loan? I mean, you know, obviously Wilbur Ross, he's worth billions of dollars. You know, he's never actually had the experience of being a working class person. And then the other, what's his name? The other Trump economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. Larry Kudlow comes out and he says, you know, well, people are showing up to work without pay out of loyalty to Donald Trump. Yeah, and then Laura Trump goes on TV and she says, well, you know, we understand that you guys are hurting, but this is really important for the future of your children and grandchildren. And this morning at LaGuardia Airport at 10 a.m. Yeah, screener, okay, cool. And this morning at 10 a.m. at LaGuardia, they shut down the... They did a ground stop. You can't, in other words, you know, nobody can take off, nobody can land for an hour from 10 to 11. And now there's a ground delay in effect, and there's also ground delays in effect at Newark and Philadelphia international airports. So, you know, have we reached a tipping point here with regard to air traffic control? Are they saying, okay, you know, we're not here out of loyalty to Donald Trump? They said that these ground stops are because they don't have the staffing to make sure everything's safe. Meanwhile, Steve Bannon appears in this indictment. The Trump campaign appears in the indictment over a dozen times, in this indictment of Roger Stone today. And Steve Bannon appears in the indictment. He was the chairman of the campaign, started in August of 2016. Keep in mind, October 7th is not only the day that the Access Hollywood tape hit the news, but it's also the day that the WikiLeaks of the Clinton campaign of John Podesta's emails. Earlier I'd said it was Hillary Clinton's emails. It was John Podesta's emails. That was October 7th. And Stone had published this tweet saying, It's going to be Podesta's time in the barrel. Let's not forget, though, that there was another tweet from Roger Stone about somebody's time in the barrel. This was after Al Franken grilled Jeff Sessions in committee, Senator Al Franken, and got Jeff Sessions to admit that he had had contacts with Russia and things like that, and you know, he revealed all those conflicts. So Sessions then had to recuse himself as a consequence of Al Franken's grilling. And once he recused himself, then Rosenstein had no choice but to appoint a special counsel. He appointed Robert Mueller. Stone was clearly PO'd about this. The Guardian has a piece about this. Tommy Carcetti is blogging about it over at DU. And so Roger Stone sends out a tweet saying, Al Franken's time in the barrel is coming. And shortly thereafter, allegations of sexual harassment against Franken show up, centering, you know, as Tommy Carcetti writes at DU, centering on a decades-old joke photograph and a few other vague accusations. Did Roger Stone engineer the destruction of Al Franken as well? Oh, and the Trump administration has figured out, they're trying to figure out a way out of this. This thing with the air marshals and the TSA, while they couldn't find money for the air marshals, they're going to issue 2018 performance awards. They're all going to get nice little marks and letters and things in their employee files. But they did find money to give a full week's worth of pay to all the TSA guys. So if you are a TSA employee and you were working back in December of last year, when the shutdown started, December 22nd, if you worked that last week of the year, you will today get apparently a full week's pay out of the 4 that you're owed. And so this is, you know, this is the Trump administration's efforts to kind of minimize the damage. And meanwhile, I mean, there's just so much going on here. Meanwhile, yesterday, the Republican National Committee's resolution group passed a resolution canceling the Republican primary, saying, we're with Trump all the way. Trump's going to be the guy. Now, it still has to pass the full RNC. But the committee that recommends these things said the RNC Resolution Committee just voted unanimously for undivided support for Donald Trump and his effective presidency. And if the RNC ratifies this, what that means is that there will be no opposition to Donald Trump. Or if somebody does come, you know, if, like, you know, Mitt Romney comes out and says, well, yeah, I'm going to, you know, go against him, Mitt Romney will not get the endorsement of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party will not sponsor things like debates and stuff like that. So it's getting real interesting here on a whole bunch of different levels. We'll pick up your calls, your thoughts on all of this right after the break. It's 17 minutes and change past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back. Just another heads up, Bernie Sanders will be with us at the top of the hour. And welcome back. Gary in Palmetto, Florida. Hey, Gary. Thanks for watching. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I know people tell you all the time that you're doing a great job, and thank you, but sometimes it gets lost, you know.
Well, thank you, Gary.
But I really do. You're doing a really good job. My question is, can the government or any part of the branches take away Trump's pardoning powers?
No.
Like, if we know he's involved in all this, can we keep him from letting his cronies go?
Because Trump's pardoning powers, this is the one kingly power that, you know, after Alexander Hamilton was arguing that the president should have a lifetime appointment and that he should have basically the same powers as the monarchs of Europe, you know, they said no to that at the Constitutional Convention, but they did decide that one kingly power the president would have would be the power of pardons. And it's written into the Constitution, so it's literally the highest law of the land. And therefore, Congress can't pass a law saying that the president can't pardon people. It's conceivable, although it would be subject to review by the Supreme Court, that Congress could narrow that power in some way. But I doubt really that that's a possibility.
Oh, that's too bad.
The one solution, the one remedy is if Trump does pardons. Yeah, I mean, this could have happened to Jerry Ford. This could have happened to George Bush when Jerry Ford pardoned all the Nixon cronies and Nixon, and George Bush pardoned all the Reagan cronies from Iran-Contra. They could have been impeached for those pardons, but Congress chose not to do that. That's the only check on the president's power, as far as I know, Gary.
And as far as the accusations and all these guys that have pleaded guilty, if they do get pardoned, can they be taken back to court by the state or the city or whatever?
The pardons only cover federal crimes. So, and this is where Trump is vulnerable with regard, and his family is vulnerable with regard to New York State, and why it's so important that the Attorney General in New York is going after them. So we'll see. Gary, thanks for the call. Good talking to you. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening to KPFK. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Yeah, Professor, I'm watching CNN this morning, right? And I'm watching these FBI agents raid this guy's house, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking it must be one of El Chapo's lieutenants, right? No, it wasn't one of El Chapo's lieutenants. It was Roger Stone. And Roger Stone is a longtime friend of President Trump, right? So I'm looking at what kind of charges are they bringing against this man. It looks like the kind of charges you bring against a guy named Al Capone. Now, watch this. All we got to do is bring Julian Assange over here, offer him impunity and immunity to tell us what the heck's going on, and that ought to clear things up. What do you think, Professor?
I think it's it might be a plan. I mean, although I don't know if Julian Assange is willing to essentially flip. I mean, it depends on how desperate Assange is. I mean, there is a secret indictment of him. So if he walks out of that embassy, England will snatch him, deport him to the United States, and we will charge him with crimes.
Well, it's just an idea,
Yeah, well, it's a good idea, I think that the water is circling down the drain here. It's getting the walls are square. Pick your terrible 1950s literature cliche. It is.
Hey, Professor, would you say that racism has hit a wall?
No. I think that it's hit a point of public awareness that is useful and important. But no, I don't think it's hit a wall, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Tragically. Morris, thank you for the call. Good talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 21 and a half minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So the guy who took down Eliot Spitzer, this is a largely unknown story. The guy who apparently took down Al Franken, Roger Stone, and took down Eliot Spitzer. If you haven't seen this documentary, Client Number 9, if you want to know who Roger Stone is, watch this documentary. It's breathtaking. It's the story of how Eliot Spitzer, as Attorney General of New York State, was going after a billionaire in New York. And it's been a few years since I watched the documentary. I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the billionaire. But this billionaire hired Roger Stone to take down Eliot Spitzer. And Roger Stone apparently bribed somebody inside the federal judiciary, inside the federal government, and got sealed federal investigative reports. They were looking into this prostitution ring in Washington, D.C., and he got these sealed, private, top secret FBI reports that indicated that one of the people who had been a customer of one of the prostitutes that was under scrutiny was in fact Eliot Spitzer. And Roger Stone made that information public. And of course that took down Eliot Spitzer. That was the end of his life in many ways. And in Client Number 9, they interview Spitzer at length. And what's so heartbreaking about this documentary, and I really encourage you to watch it, is the first 20% of the documentary, the first fifth of the documentary is clips from Eliot Spitzer giving speeches and things. The guy, it was going to be the next FDR. He was going to be president of the United States. And Roger Stone took him down. Roger Stone, who used to work for Richard Nixon, who has Richard Nixon tattooed on his back, took down Al Franken, apparently, took down Eliot Spitzer, and now it appears took down Hillary Clinton. So my question, Does the Clinton campaign or does Hillary Clinton herself have the basis for a lawsuit that could be established at the Supreme Court for fraud against the United States of America and against their campaign? They are the aggrieved party. They would have to file the lawsuit, although I would think that any of us could file a lawsuit to say that, you know, we are aggrieved parties too, but it might be a little more a little thinner, a little weaker. But does the Clinton campaign have a lawsuit that they could bring in federal court that says Trump is president as a consequence of a fraud? He should be deprived of the fruit of that fraud. Therefore, Trump and Pence are no longer president, and Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine are president and vice president. Just like that. Is that even possible? I don't know. I honestly don't know. Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us on Monday. He's a constitutional lawyer, a Yale Law School graduate. I left a message for him this morning, but never heard back. You know, asking essentially the same question. We will certainly talk with him on Monday when he comes on the program. So anyhow, William in Eureka, California. Hey, William, thanks for listening to 1480 AM. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for doing what you do.
Sure.
I'm calling in today with a Get Out the Vote action alert for people in California. I think there's a lot of people that vote in every national election, but they don't realize that these state party elections happen every 2 years, and they're very important. If you have a minute or two, I could tell your audience more about them.
Very quickly.
Well, this weekend and all throughout California, the California Democratic Party is holding an elections called ADEM. It stands for Assembly District Election Meetings. Half of these took place 2 weeks ago, and the rest of them take place this weekend. I want to encourage all of your listeners in California to go to a website, www.adems.vote. You can find the progressives that are running in your district simply by going there and selecting the assembly district that you live in. I also have a really good idea for people that don't want to donate to the Democratic Party, but really want to help propel progressive ideas. One thing you can do is you can join the Democratic Progressive Caucus in your state. You can go online if you live in California, just Google Progressive Caucus California plus donate, and you can do two things at one time. You can give them a little money and you can join their caucus and really get in tune with what's happening in progressive politics in California. You always encourage people to get more involved, and I just want to thank you for that, because both you and Bernie Sanders have inspired me to do more. And when you start getting more involved, you meet a lot of people that are already out there passionately acting on your behalf, and it's a really nice thing to do.
Thank you, William. Great stuff. Thank you for the heads up. That's great news. You mentioned Bernie. He will be with us in 30 minutes at the top of the hour. Stick around. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back with your calls. Can Hillary Clinton now take Trump out of office, or once the fraud is proven? We'll see.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after this. It's 27 and a half minutes past the hour. Today from Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America by Martha S. Jones. In the introduction, Rights of Colored Men Debating Citizenship in Antebellum America is the title of the introduction. The title of William Yates's 1838 treatise, Rights of Colored Men, aptly captures the subject of this book. The 19th century Americans for whom Yates wrote were fascinated by a juridical puzzle. Not slaves, nor aliens, nor the equals of free white men, who were former slaves and their descendants before the law. None were more interested in this question than black Americans themselves, and Birthright Citizens takes up their point of view to tell the history of race and rights in the antebellum United States. The pressures brought on by so-called black laws and colonization schemes, especially a radical strain, explain why free people of color feared their forced removal from the United States. In response, they claimed an unassailable belonging, one grounded in birthright citizenship. No legal text expressly provided for such, but their ideas anticipated the terms of the 14th Amendment. Set in Baltimore, a place between North, South, and the Atlantic world, this book traces the scenes and the debates through which Black Americans developed ideas about citizenship and claims to the rights that citizens enjoyed. Along the way, they engaged with legislators, judges, and law's everyday administrators. From the local courthouse to the chambers of high courts, the rights of colored men came to define citizenship for the nation as a whole. Yates authored the very first legal treatise on the rights of free Black Americans. It was 1838 when Rights of Colored Men to Suffrage, Citizenship, and Trial by Jury was published in Philadelphia. He was not one of antebellum America's highly regarded legal minds. Some say he read law for a time, although there's no evidence that he was admitted to the bar. Instead, Yates's career began with a short-lived stint as a newspaper publisher in his hometown of Troy, New York. His bona fides on the subject of race and citizenship were best established during his years as an agent for the American Anti-Slavery Society. While many abolitionists maintained a self-conscious distance from free Black communities, Yates centered his work there. The opposition of free people, the oppression of free people of color was a companion to slavery in Yates's view, with anti-slavery work necessarily extending into questions of free people's status. Penning Rights of Colored Men was the pinnacle of this mission. Yates placed a powerful instrument of authority in the hands of free African Americans and their allies. The antebellum legal treatise was a key tool in the standardization and dissemination of legal knowledge and was typically devoted to the comprehensive synthesis of a single branch of law. By the late 1830s, Yates was following on the success of James Kent's commentaries and Joseph Story's treatise series. The genre had come to be associated with the concepts of law as scientific knowledge, legal education as systemic, and the profession as respectable. Yates successfully adopted legal culture's own tool to such a degree that readers from the 19th century until today have regarded him as an authority on free Black legal status. But Yates's text was also a work of advocacy. Rights of Colored Men received prominent notices in the Black and abolitionist press and could be purchased at local anti-slavery society offices. As a result, the work served as a probing legal treatise that fueled activist arguments. Yates provides a window into the position that some activists, Black and white, took on race and citizenship in the end of the 1830s. Law was an instrument of change, and Yates forthrightly explained his objective: to undermine prejudice against color. Racism had led to legal disability, exclusion from militia service, naturalization, suffrage, public schooling, ownership of real property, office holding, and courtroom testimony. Yates was especially unsettled by the disenfranchisement of free Black men in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and more recently Pennsylvania. Assembling evidence from legal culture, he believed, would help establish the rights and citizenship of free Black people. Yates began with a story of the nation's origin. The establishment of the United States, he said, had been at the outset a revolutionary, Republican, and an enlightened undertaking that was untainted by racism or distinctions among and between races. This had been possible in the wake of the American Revolution because the founding generation knew firsthand the contributions Black people had made to independence through military service and through labor. American law had originally been colorblind, as evidenced by the absence of racial distinctions in founding documents such as the federal and state constitutions. Change came in the early 19th century at the fault line between generations. A forgetting occurred, Yates posited. Lawmakers of the early republic did not know how Black people had contributed to the nation's founding and hence were entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizens. In this sense, Yates's aim was partly to restore that past to the nation's political and legal memory. To achieve this, he compiled a history of lawmakers and their deliberations, in which he found the development of anti-Black prejudice in courts, constitutional conventions, and legislatures. He followed the professional lives of men whose work included roles from low-level administrator to convention delegate and judge. Their ideas about free Black people moved with them. Most powerful was Yates's argument about how law, through suffering from amnesia, could be made right. The book, Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, Roger Stone is out there making a strong case for a pardon right now. I am loyal to Donald Trump. I'm one of his oldest friends. I will never bear false witness. All you good Christians out there, notice that phrase. I will never bear false witness against my friend. All right. Marcia in Englewood, Florida. Hey, Marcia, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I am so scared. Everybody's micromanaging everything that's going on right now, that they're missing the whole picture. If you look at what Donald Trump is doing with this company he's now the CEO of, our country, he's running it exactly like he ran his corporations. He ran them into the ground, filed for bankruptcy, did not pay employees, did not reinvest profits into the company to keep them viable. And now he's doing that now with the U.S. government. I think we could give him absolutely everything he wants regarding the wall and more, no DACA, and he still will not sign anything to reopen the government. It is not his intention to reopen the government. It's his intention to bring the government down to a point where he can make it like, rewrite the whole Constitution, make it like the USSR was, or Russia is now, North Korea, the Philippines. He wants to be the dictator.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion. If we don't stop him, that's where we're going.
Yeah, may well be the case, Marcia. Weird beeping there in the background. May well be the case. I mean, who knows? But it's also possible. I mean, the question you have to ask is Donald Trump breaking the U.S. government? And he's doing that. He's breaking the back of the U.S. government. He's damaging the reputation of the federal government as an employer. He is causing scientists and police officers and people who want to become FBI agents to say, oh, wait a minute, do I want to do this, or do I want to go to work for Eric Prince of Blackwater? He is breaking the government. So the question is he breaking the government on behalf of the anti-government billionaires like the Koch brothers, the libertarians who think that our government is doing way too much stuff and it needs to be cut down to size? Or is he doing it on behalf of a foreign power or multiple foreign powers? You know, would Saudi Arabia, would Israel, would Russia, would China? I mean, you know, these foreign powers who hew to these hard right worldviews. Is he working on behalf of any or all of them to diminish the power and stature of the United States government? I think that's going to ultimately be the big question. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's up?
Thanks so much for taking my call. And to your point, Tom, that's exactly what Mattis said in his letter. I don't know if you remember his letter. He talked about China, he talked about Russia, and he talked about these countries who don't believe in democracy and how they're being emboldened and empowered, and everything that Trump is doing is to give him that opportunity.
Yep.
But what I wanted to mention to you, anytime we're referring to Donald Trump, we need to also include Mitch McConnell. We need to say Trump and McConnell together.
Right, those are the two guys who are keeping the government shut down, Trump and McConnell. And if either one of them changed their position, the other would be forced to.
Exactly. And just like he always say Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, we need to say Donald Trump and Mr. McConnell are shutting the government down. Yeah. And thank you so much for taking my call.
You're welcome. Thank you, Omar, and amen. And by the way, if the Clinton campaign was successfully able to sue and say this was a fraud and take away the fruits of the fraud from Trump, in other words, kick Trump and Pence out of the White House, I don't know if they would install, I said earlier, that until Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine become president and vice president, it may well be that Nancy Pelosi becomes president. That's probably the more constitutional remedy. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. First of all, I have to say shame on Kristen Gillibrand for what she did to Al Franken. Shame on the Electoral College for not doing their job, because it was obvious what was going on. And if there's ever a case to not go with what they did, this was it. And also, I want to also say, Elliot Spitzer, if he wants to run, he should run, and I think he's a good man, and I would forgive his sins.
Yeah, me too. Have you seen client number 9, Steve? the movie?
No, I haven't, but I'm glad you include me into this. I would like to see it.
I am pretty sure it's over on Netflix or Hulu, one or the other. I can't, search it right now while I'm live on the air, but I'm pretty sure it is. It came out like a decade ago, but it's an absolutely amazing and tragic movie. But it's the best, it gives you the best understanding of who Roger Stone is and what kind of crimes, because he brags in this movie about actually committing federal crimes to take down Spitzer.
It looks like he's in the barrel right now, and
yeah,
metaphorically or whatever, and that's good. Getting back to disavowing this election, I'm in the Robert Reich camp. This should be totally disavowed. Our constitutional founders I'm sure, would agree with this. Mm-hmm. The whole election should be wiped out. Hillary Clinton should be installed. Tim Kaine should be installed. The Supreme Court judges, Gorsuch and the other one, Kavanaugh, should be gone. And Gorsuch was really not a liberal. He was picked by Orrin Hatch. And this
you mean Garland, Merrick Garland?
Merrick Garland. I'm sorry. Yes. This should be totally voided, and I think that's exactly what should go on.
Yeah, I agree. Steve, thank you for the call. Michael in Denver. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Good morning, Tom. Tom, I was calling up when you started the show. You were talking about the possibilities of doing what you've been talking about, and all. This is an illegitimate administration, but what I wanted to say was that going back to the old days when I lived in New York back in the 60s and 70s, Rudy Giuliani was going after the mafia. The RICO Act, which is I believe a federal law. This was not a New York state law or anything, but it's a federal law to go after all organized crime. Right. And here's the third thing you're saying about is Putin, is this good for Putin? Is this good for the David and the Koch brothers? There's a third reason here also. Donald Trump has always been a wise guy. He's been connected to either indirectly or very closely indirectly to New York organized crime.
Right.
So I believe that, and you might be able to get someone, to look at the RICO Act, because I remember back in the day, the Colombos, the Genoveses, the Gambinos, they lost a lot of money and a lot of property when their people, their capos, all of the people, the businesses, the illegitimate businesses, got tapped into by Giuliani. They lost literally millions and millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. It was taken away from them because it was gain that they had accumulated illegally. I'm thinking that, everything that this man has done, from the emoluments clause and before and after, him getting to the White House, because I won't say he won the election. This is all stuff that needs to be looked at, and all federal, anti-crime laws, and in particular the SEC, needs to get involved in this when we can get them to get involved.
I predict the entire Trump crime family is going down.
Amen, because that would be the logical conclusion. They've all had their hands in it. Yeah. He's going after Cohen so that he can deflect all of the things that they've done, all the illegitimate things. The bankruptcies are illegitimate. He walked away, and all. And like I tell people, I'll get off. I tell people the only way that you treat Donald Trump is that you go right up to him, stand nose to nose, and tell him, "I'm going to take you down. Let's see you do something about it."
Yeah.
That's what people in New York do. And I'm a Brooklynite, so we like to get into the muck and mire of it all. And for years, I've seen, how he's done, his dirty business in New York. And the only people that came out were the ones that stood up to him because he backed away. He got all of his lawyers and all the people, the National Enquirer, to kind of be the buffer. So thank you very much anyway.
You're welcome, Michael. Excellent points all. The Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization RICO Act, I think has been clearly violated here by Trump in numerous ways and circumstances over time. And we'll see, but it's starting to look really interesting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Just a heads up, in 15, 20 minutes or so, Bernie Sanders will be here with us. Harry in Eureka, California. Hey, Harry, what's on your mind today?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid one of the lasting legacies of the Trump thing is going to be blaming the other. And to that end, the previous speaker had a comment about nose to nose. Mm-hmm. And this is a short thing. It says, letters to the editor. Re the Wednesday political cartoon in which the poor boys were being crucified, supposedly, and the answer was, I, as a black man, have experienced also that smirk on innocent, in capital letters, white faces. I'm afraid the legacy of Trump is of the others. We telegraph white displeasure.
Yeah, no, I agree.
They don't know it.
Donald Trump has done more to promote racism and racial hatred from the White House than any president since Woodrow Wilson.
And we don't actually see it. We saw it nose to nose with that young man with the mega hat, and we could recognize that.
Yeah.
But some of the more subtle stuff you and I won't see.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Harry.
They do.
And it has changed America. I mean, hate crimes are up dramatically. Bullying in school is up dramatically. All of these behaviors that are reflections of who Donald Trump is, that are essentially evil and corrupt, are spreading across our country like an infection. And it really concerns me. Harry, thank you for the call. Well said. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Happy Friday, Tom.
Thanks. Back at you.
How great it is to go back to having Bernie. I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. I'm just trying to promote the blue wave. I mean, it's amazing. I've been listening to your calls all week long. The energy's here. And I think we have a golden opportunity to capitalize. I don't know what the senator's going to decide to do. I know Senator Warren's put her name out there. I'm real supportive of listening to all, as you said earlier, these candidates. But I think, it's blaring to me that the time for him is now. He has held himself quite well, actually.
Time for whom?
In spite of losing Bernie Sanders.
Okay.
To decide. And I don't push. I know you don't push, but, Ro Khanna is my congressman, and I'm not pushing him either. But I think there are a lot of really good candidates, but Bernie stands out. If we are to continue with this AOC type of a wave, this gentleman has demonstrated he can lead.
Yeah.
He has distinguished himself as an independently thinking, willing to work to solve problems. I mean, I'm grateful that he's on your show. But that being said, I got a chance to read this summer two books that I found very interesting. One was written by former FBI Director Comey. I thought that was very telling. And the other was written by the Woodworth book. And I think that fear book describes exactly what's going on with Stone. And he references, just like you do, everything that happened in the book. You go back and you can see chapter and verse. The case is there. So I'm really grateful that this is moving along, and look forward to hearing from Senator Sanders. Thank you for your time.
Amen. Okay, thanks a lot, Joe. I appreciate the call, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV there. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls here on Anything Goes Friday. A lot going on. Roger Stone indicted. Roger Stone proclaiming his innocence and that he will be loyal to Donald Trump to the end. In other words, begging for a pardon. Meanwhile, Trump seems to be freaked out that the FBI is still doing their job, even though they're not being paid. I mean, we can't have that, right? And air traffic controllers are starting to slow down the nation's traffic. And welcome back. 48 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Devon in Forest Lake, Minnesota. Hey, Devon, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you? It's been a long time.
Fine, thank you.
Well, you know, there's a couple of things. One, there was an article that came out in the Washington Post last year that just doesn't get enough attention. It was Dana Milbank. It's called 8 Republicans Picked the Worst Possible Place to Celebrate 4th of July.
Oh, they went to Moscow. Yeah.
Yeah, and John Kennedy, like some of the most vocal idiots on the side of the moron, were actually spending 4th of July in Moscow. And that needs to be really highlighted. The other thing is that I really believe now is the time to call Nancy Pelosi's office, to call your own representatives and Nancy and say, look, it's time to start impeachment proceedings. You can reach anyone who represents you by calling 202-224-3121. And if you want to speak to Nancy Pelosi, her zip code is 94103. Now, I repeated that a few times on your chat room and was blocked summarily by Mr. Peacock. So I guess it's against the rules to repeat information encouraging people to take action?
I don't know, Devon. I'm not in that chat room, but if Nigel blocked you, then probably it was for flooding or spamming the site, and you know, we just don't let that happen. Chad, thanks for the call though. Chad in Port Angeles, Washington. Hey, Chad, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I've been a long-time listener, and this is the first time I've really had time to call because I'm a furloughed federal employee, and that's not my real name, by the way. But I work for the Federal Aviation Administration, and we just received word from our union. We are represented by the same people as the air traffic controllers, that they're planning on expanding the list of people to be recalled. Up to this point, they've only recalled people and forced them to work for nothing if they meet the legal requirement of protecting life or property in the very immediate sense. I, for example, work in aircraft certification, and we approve new airplane designs, and that has no immediate effect if we don't do that. That does, however, affect the business plans of certain large corporations. And my feeling is that this pressure is coming from on high to try and force more of us to work for nothing to try and reduce the impact of this shutdown.
Well, you know, I think he's the chairman of Trump's Council of Economic Advisors, Larry Kudlow, yesterday, the old Fox News guy, came out and said that people like you, Chad, the federal workers who are showing up for work, apparently you're furloughed, but federal workers who are showing up to work are doing it because of loyalty to Donald Trump. Have you been hearing much about that in your correspondence with your colleagues?
There is no loyalty to Donald Trump. That's a joke. For the most part, it's of course quite the opposite. Even my Republican friends are not feeling any loyalty to Donald Trump.
But Laura Trump tells us that this is so important what you're doing for our grandchildren and future generations. I mean, we've got to have that wall and keep those brown people out.
Yeah, that's of course absurd. Everybody I know is adamantly opposed to wasting money on this wall that the great Oompa Loompa told us Mexico would pay for anyway. And so I do have one other quick thing, Tom, that I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can talk me down on this a little. Ever since Trump took office, an issue that I don't hear talked about, which I believe is part of the underlying discontent that allowed this guy to get up there in the first place, and that is with regards to the massive economic disparity in this country and our trade deals. Ever since he started blundering around with China and Mexico, it seems like the Democrats have kind of gone silent on fair trade over free trade, and to me that's a huge issue that we have to address.
They haven't been silent on it, Chad. In fact, Sherrod Brown has been out there talking about this loudly. The problem is that the media, I mean, our corporate media is owned by large corporations that are involved in, interstate and international commerce and hold a very neoliberal perspective. And so, when people start talking about protectionism, when Trump started talking about it, it was like, oh, isn't this weird? Let's make fun of him. And they didn't realize most Americans support that. And the Democratic Party has, held the position of, protectionism is a good thing for a long, long time. I mean, Bill Clinton defied that, but he didn't take the entire Democratic Party with him. He only took about a half of it. And so, you know, and this is the conundrum for people like Sherrod Brown, is like, yes, we should have tariffs. Yes, we should have protectionist policies. No, we don't want most of our stuff made in China. You know, China just became, or will become in the next 6 months, according to the Financial Times, the largest consumer economy in the world. In other words, more demand, more consumer demand in China than even in the United States. In other words, the richest country in the world. When that happens, Chinese who walk into stores to buy things, who walk into their local Chinese version of a Walmart or whatever it may be, clothing stores, everything that they buy says made in China, which is how it was in the United States in 1980 when Reagan came into office. Everything you know, Sam Walton had big banners in his Walmart stores that said made in the USA. He was proud of that fact. That was one of his slogans, made in the USA. You could go into any store anywhere in America and buy and see pretty much nothing but things made in America because we made things here. Now, 40 years of neoliberal policies, Reaganism policies later, you can't buy anything in some stores in America that are made in America. I mean, go into a Walmart and try and find an American-made product. Good luck. And you know, so the Democrats get this. And know that this has to be fixed. And the problem is that, A, there's not a consensus across the party because of the neoliberal break with this that Bill Clinton took on in '92 when he campaigned on, you know, yes, I like NAFTA, and then, you know, the WTO and all that stuff. But so, A, you've got this schism in the Democratic Party, but B, I think it's really important to note that the people who support Clinton's old position that, you know, it doesn't matter where things are made, we'll just retrain people and turn them into computer programmers, has failed. It has utterly and absolutely failed. It led to the rise of China and the destruction of the American industrial, you know, base, and something needs to be done about it. Now, and therefore what Donald Trump is doing with tariffs is arguably a step in the right direction. The problem is that he's doing it all under emergency orders as president. And that's not going to help at all. If you want General Motors to build a new factory in the United States because they see that down the road they're going to be able to offer their cars at a lower price than the Japanese automakers can, if you want them to do that, you have to do it by legislation so that they know that 5-10 years from now when that factory comes online, that they actually still have that price advantage. If you do it by presidential proclamation, which is how Trump is doing it, calling it an emergency, it's a temporary measure. There's no major corporation in the United States who's going to build a factory based on a temporary measure. And so Trump's, you know, efforts, while, you know, like I said, I think it's actually a good thing that he's sensitizing Americans to these issues, although he's doing it so badly that it's going to fail, and that's going to make it even harder. Say Bernie becomes president, you know, or you know, another good progressive becomes president. Bernie has held this position forever. I mean, you know, 11 years on this show, every single week, saying we need tariffs or we need a protectionist trade policy. If he were to become president and say that, people would say, "Oh, Trump tried that; it doesn't work," right? And then we're back to the whole, you know, to the Clinton position, the Bill Clinton position of, you know, tariffs are terrible things and we need to get rid of all our tariffs. I mean, you know, when Reagan came into office, the average tariff was in the 20% in the United States. You know, by the time, you know, Obama came into office, it was less than 1%, which is where they're at now. So it's a complex issue, Chad, but it does boil down to some simple principles. Chad, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to KBCS. Bernie Sanders is up next. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 58 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair, to quote Bernie Sanders, is not an option.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a single mom, a young single mom in Nevada, worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Senator Bernie Sanders, representing the great state of Vermont in the United States Senate. Senator Sanders, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Tom.
It is always great. So great having you on, Bernie. The shutdown is moving along. They slowed down traffic. Actually, they stopped traffic for a little less than an hour at LaGuardia this morning. Philadelphia, Newark are reporting delays because they don't have enough air traffic controllers. What's the latest with the shutdown? How should we be looking at this? How should we be reacting to it? What can we do?
I think there are a couple of things, Tom. Number one, our hearts should go out and we should understand the kind of fear and suffering that is now taking place among 800,000 federal employees and their children. So these are folks now who in some cases are coming into work and not getting paid, or they're not coming into work and they're not getting paid. And you got a president of the United States who precipitated this whole thing, who says, you know what, this shutdown may go on not just for weeks, but even for months. And then on top of the federal employees issue, you got a lot of contract workers. These are people who work for companies who have contracts with the federal government, often paid quite low wages. They are in the position not only of not getting paid now, but unlike federal employees, there is no guarantee that they will be paid after the shutdown ends. And we're working on that to make sure that when the shutdown ends, they do get paid. But it's at this moment, there is no guarantee. So the first thing I think we've got to understand, there are a whole lot of folks in this country who are being treated in a horrible, horrible way, forced to work without getting paid, and they have no idea how long that's going to go on. And second of all, you got all the people who need government services, whether it is from the Department of Agriculture or the Department of the Treasury. If you're concerned about the status of your tax returns, you ain't going to get the information that you need right now, as well as many, many other agencies. And then you got the whole issue of national security. You know, I was just talking to a guy today who knows a lot about this issue.
And what he says is that TSA workers, the guys you see when you go into the airport, who do the security there, by and large, they are pretty low paid. And turnover, in general, is quite high. That turnover rate is going up exponentially right now. People going out and getting other jobs. The government is not hiring anybody new, which means there will be less security at the airports. And let's hope to God that nothing terrible happens as a result. Then you got the air traffic controllers, who are also in tough economic shape. And what we're seeing today is that there are delays now in airports around the country, and that will only get worse, and that's going to impact the entire economy. So we got a guy in the White House now who wants to get a wall that most Americans don't want. Certainly almost the vast majority of Americans don't want to see the government shut down over this issue, and this thing goes on. Now, having said all of that, Tom, there is some good news, I think, and that is that, as I'm sure your listeners know, yesterday we brought up a bill very close to, almost identical to a bill that was passed unanimously in the Senate before the shutdown, and we got 6 Republicans who broke away from Trump. That's a good sign, and I think many Republicans understand, many Republican senators understand that the American people are sick and tired of this Trump-initiated shutdown, and they want the government to reopen and federal employees to be paid.
Bernie, Senator, you and I have talked for years about the Koch brothers and David Koch running for president in vice president in 1980, and on a platform of basically stripping the federal government down to nothing. Yeah. And there are several, and I've been quoting some of these over the last week on the air here. There have been a number of right-wing writers in some of the more prominent, actually, high visibility, high credibility conservative publications who have suggested that what Trump is doing really has very little to do with the wall, and they're praising him for it. That this is proof of concept. That when this is all done after a month or 2 months or 3 months of having the federal government shut down, we will then be able to look back and say, we really didn't need all those interior employees. We really didn't need the EPA doing that stuff. Mm-hmm. We really didn't need the FDA or the USDA. We can privatize all those things very easily now. Trump has proven that this works. There's this debate going on. Rachel Maddow was kind of insinuating last night on TV that Trump might be doing this on behalf of Putin, and obviously, damaging the United States is something that seems to be, one of his interests. So is it Putin? Is it the billionaires? I mean, what's going on?
Well, here, I think the point you're making, I wouldn't go to Putin and to Russia, but I think the point you're making is a very good point. Let us understand that what the Koch brothers and these extreme right-wing people believe is that, by and large, government is an evil. They don't believe in Social Security. They don't believe in Medicare. They don't believe in Medicaid. They don't believe in public education. That is the philosophy of these right-wing libertarians. So if your point is, and I did a little bit of writing on this, I think, last week, that one of the motives, I think there are many motives for Trump's action here. I think the wall and appealing to his base certainly is one of them. But the other idea of saying that, look, we can lay off hundreds of thousands of federal employees. We can make working for the federal government extremely unattractive. What bright young person graduating college this year is going to be running to work for the federal government when you see this contempt for federal employees? So I agree with you. I think certainly part of the motive here is to move toward the privatization of essential services that have historically been done by the government and give more power to corporate interest over the lives of Americans. And I do believe that is part of what's going on.
Do you think it might backfire? Do you think that this event might be causing Americans to realize how important our federal workforce is? Or do you think that like these conservatives are suggesting in places like the National Review, that, as I recall, that people will then understand how irrelevant these federal workers are?
Yeah, well, they're not going to feel that federal employees are relevant when they can't get on a plane. Because you don't have adequately trained or the numbers of air control people that you need, or that you are not confident that when you're getting on a plane, the safety standards and the security standards are where they should be, or when you are sitting down with your hamburger tonight, that maybe that meat has not been inspected, or your salad has not been inspected. So I think in addition to all of that, I think it is clear that a Donald Trump who campaigned, as you may recall, as a friend of working people, I think the average American is going to say, you know, you're not a friend of anybody when you treat 800,000 federal workers and many, many contract employees with a kind of contempt that you are. Imagine saying to somebody, and you know, and what we are seeing is that Trump and Wilbur Ross and these other billionaires, they have no idea what it is like for people to live paycheck to paycheck. No idea. What it is like when you are not getting paid and you got a mortgage coming up, or you got to put food on the table for your kids. What does it say when we have long-time federal employees now going to food banks in order to feed their families? So do I think that this is backfiring in general? I do. I think for a number of reasons. Number one, relatively few people in the country think you shut down the government over a wall. People, I think, are feeling very strongly about the terrible things being done to federal employees. They're not getting the services that they need. And I think increasingly they see what a cruel and irresponsible President Trump is.
Senator, I know you have to run. Just one last question. What can we do? What can people who are listening or watching this program right now do to support you in your efforts and to support the efforts of the rest, you know, the rest of the caucus that's working so hard to try to stop this shutdown?
All right. I think the answer is really quite simple. The truth of the matter is, and the heart of this issue from a political point of view is, Tom, is the Republicans have got to, in the Congress, Republicans have got to have the guts to stand up to Trump. There was a Republican caucus yesterday where it got very heated because not only did 6 Republicans end up standing up to Trump in their voting with us to reopen the government, but a lot more expressed anger to the Vice President Pence, who was there. And I think what listeners have got to do, the American people have got to do, is say to Mitch McConnell, Leader McConnell, bring forward the same resolution that was passed in the House, which is almost identical to the one that Mitch McConnell and every other Republican voted for before the shutdown, which would keep the government open. So all you're asking of Mitch McConnell is to vote now for what he voted on a month ago before Trump intervened with his $5.7 billion for the wall. That's not a heavy lift. I mean, that's not asking. You're asking McConnell to do today what he did 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Yeah. Amen. Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator, thank you so much for dropping by today. The door is always open. Keep us up to date on how everything's going, please.
Great, Tom. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Senator. Great talking with you. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday. Your calls continuing right after this. It's 17 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. It's always nice to have a little injection of sanity here from our elected officials. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Roger Stone out there begging for a pardon. I am loyal to Donald Trump to the end. They can put me on the rack. I won't break. And welcome back. Mary in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. Mary?
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi. I just want to let you know, a friend of mine, her husband works for the FBI, and if they miss their mortgage payment, he loses his security clearance.
Yep.
I mean, how can we let anybody take away security clearances for this
Well, this raises one of the most interesting conspiracy theories around, which is that Donald Trump didn't do this because he wants a wall. The wall was an excuse. He didn't do it because he's trying to break government on behalf of the Koch brothers. He did it because he wants to destroy the FBI. Because the FBI is investigating him.
Totally.
Yeah. And not just the FBI. I mean, it's not just the FBI that's working without pay. It's also our spies. It's our State Department. I mean, you know, the really critical functions that have been irritating Donald Trump, that, you know, the 19 intelligence agency, I think it is, maybe 17, all the intelligence agencies came out and said, yep, the Russians worked to put Trump in office. That really pissed him off. You know, he's very upset about that. And so he's taking them down right now. The FBI comes out and seriously, you know, opens an investigation into whether Donald Trump is working for a foreign power. You know, is he dancing to Putin's tune? I mean, they opened that investigation right after he became president, right after the election, and apparently that investigation is still going on. He doesn't want that investigation to happen, so shut down the government, cut off the funding for the FBI. They're talking about bringing. I mean, they just announced today that they're giving TSA agents, who are some of the most lowly paid people out there. I mean, they start at $25,000 a year as a TSA agent, and if you're in management, it's $43,000. I mean, that's the entire spectrum of pay scale for the TSA. And as Bernie was pointing out, these people are leaving in droves, but they're going to pay the TSA agents at least a week's worth of pay to kind of get them through. They're not doing that with the FBI. I don't think that that's a coincidence. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's a mistake. I think that, you know, personally, I subscribe to the conspiracy theory that Trump wants to break the FBI. Whether it is that he initially started this shutdown in order to break the FBI, or whether it was just an impulse, whether it was a whim, whether it was Sean Hannity telling him to do it because he had some grand chessboard in a political thing in his mind. I don't know, and I'm reluctant to suggest that he did it to break the FBI. But now that it has started, he has realized, hey, you know, one of the things out of this is that we get this, you know, ruin the morale of the intelligence services and the police agencies of the United States that just happen to be looking into the Trump organization. What do you think, Mary?
I think part of it is also that by getting rid of their security clearances, they can't investigate.
Exactly.
They can't get the. I'm trying to think of how to.
Well, they can't look at the intelligence that might indicate that Trump was colluding or his campaign was colluding because they no longer have the security clearance to look at that raw intelligence.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Mary, thank you for the call and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. And boy, this is incredible. I mean, you know, when neighbors whose spouses work for the FBI are telling their neighbors, my husband or wife, she didn't say which, my spouse may lose their security clearance because we miss a mortgage payment. It's getting real. It's getting very real. Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? You know, it's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, you know, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, you know, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday. Bill in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just have a very quick comment and question. As far as the elimination of racial prejudice, that's one of the main principles of the Baha'i faith. But then the question is, one thing the president has access to is all the top secret military technology of the United States. And when you have a rogue like Trump, is there anything to prevent him from divulging and using that information for his own personal financial gain after he leaves office?
To the best of my knowledge, there is not, Bill.
Yeah, because that's a main, he can give that information to Putin or use it in any way that it's conceivable. I mean, that's a serious concern.
It is. It is a very serious concern. The idea that the guy running our country right now might be doing so incompetently is alarming. The idea that he might be doing it with a secondary agenda of damaging the country on behalf of right-wing libertarian billionaires is even more troubling. And the idea that he might be doing it on behalf of a foreign country is screamingly troubling. Bernie kind of rejected the third. I'm inclined not to think that that's what he's doing. I think that he's motivated by business interests. He wants to, he's going to make $200-300 million if he can build that Trump Tower in Moscow. And so I think that that's probably what's leading him rather than Putin saying, hey, Donald, break the government, please. But, go figure. I mean, I think he's breaking the government in part because it shuts down the FBI and it shuts down the court system and it will shut down the investigation into Donald Trump. Plus, it allows him to capture the news cycle every day so word about Mueller isn't coming out and things like that.
But that top secret information, he can walk around and have access to anything he wants.
Well, and now he's got 30 people in the White House who the FBI said don't give security clearances to these people. And this one guy that they brought in, a couple months after Trump was inaugurated, this one guy that they brought in named Klein has given security clearances, top secret security clearances to 30 people that the FBI said these people should not have access to top secret and sensitive information. And that's going on right this minute. Bill, thanks for the call. Dan in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Dan, what's up?
It's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you.
So you and I are, for the most part, on the same page, but I know you're not going to agree with me on this one. A few minutes ago, a woman called in and said, call your representatives about impeachment. I think that's a bad idea, and here's why. We just need to write it out with this current president because we know what we're dealing with. If they impeach President Trump and Pence becomes president, we have no idea what we're dealing with. And I think, honestly, Pence is a bigger wingnut than Trump is. Pence would like to see all civil rights rolled back. He'd like to see homosexuals pushed back into the closet, take away civil rights for minorities. I just think that...
Oh, and women's issues. Get started on women's issues with Pence.
Exactly.
I mean,
you know things are bad. I will agree with you 100%. You know things are bad when you miss Bush too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you'll notice that I have not so much been calling for the impeachment of Trump as for the annulment of the election and the removal of both Trump and Pence for fraud, or maybe some other basis. I don't know. But, it certainly seems to me that this was a fraudulent election on so many different levels. I mean, so many different things happened that point to intentional fraud. And Roger Stone is right at the center of an awful lot of it. But I share your concern, Dan. Pence could be actually more dangerous and destructive to America than Donald Trump because he's competent. He actually served in Congress, and he used to be a right-wing talk show host before that. That's how he got to Congress. Was these billionaires and their networks of right-wing radio. He catapulted right through that, and he's dangerous to democracy. Dan, thanks for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. The White House has announced that any time now Donald Trump is going to make some remarks about the shutdown. We're not going to carry that live. He just tends to lie so much and say so many inflammatory things that I personally don't want to give him the platform. I will, however, once he has said whatever he has to say, I'll let you know essentially what he said. We'll share that information with you. Ray in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Tom, this is my first time. So
well, thank you for calling.
This is, I'm kind of a newbie, but I've been listening to you for quite some time. I want to reflect back on the Trump fraudulent presidency and some of the points that you brought up before. And there's a figure that hasn't come up in my estimation is probably the one person you can blame for this whole mess in the first place. When we were talking about, or you were talking about the RNC's endorsement of him as a candidate, of course, a lot of people wonder, why did they take him seriously in the first place?
Right.
Now, if my memory serves me correctly, the whole story about Paul Manafort came out while Trump was still a nominee, still a candidate. He didn't have the nomination yet.
Right.
Because it came up in the middle of the summer of 2016.
Well, as soon as Manafort was given the job of head of the Trump campaign,
right.
Word came out that Manafort had spent the last 15, 20 years working for hardcore right-wing dictators around the world in Ukraine and other places.
Yes, and as soon as it came out that he had connections to Russia, they got rid of him right away.
Yeah.
That should have sent up a red flag right then, and I don't believe that Trump had the nomination yet. My question is, why didn't the RNC investigate that? They should have said, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What is this connection to Russia? That should have been a warning sign right there.
I agree, but everybody was so, on the right, everybody was so in love with Donald Trump. He was this truth teller. He was like Bulworth. He was saying the thing. He was he said to Jeb Bush, "Your brother was a terrible president. He lied us into the war in Iraq." And all over the country, people were going, "Yay!" And the stupid war in Afghanistan. We don't need that. And we've got to cut taxes for working people and raise taxes on wealthy people like me. I mean, these are actually things he said. Everybody in the United States should have health care, and it should be less expensive than under Obamacare. We're going to do that. It's absurd and obscene that China is now the world's largest consumer economy, or will be in the next few months. And if you're Chinese, you walk into any store in China and everything you see is made in China in that store. But if you walk into any store in the United States, everything you see in the United States in that store is not made in the United States, it's made in China. This was the result of 40 years of neoliberal policies that were kicked off by Ronald Reagan and have not been stopped by any other president since then, Democratic or Republican, and Trump promised to stop them. And people that I know who voted Democratic for years and years voted for Donald Trump because of that. And a lot of people who watch Fox News and listen to right-wing hate radio think that he's actually doing these things successfully. In fact, he's shooting himself in the foot and he's hurting us all. But it's like there is this profound reality that Trump, even though he was lying through his teeth, he did not intend to fulfill any of these promises, that Trump was saying things that a lot of Americans knew were actually true. And that's why they voted for him. Now, we now know that, he was a truth-telling liar, but this is where we're at, Ray.
Well, that was the people's reaction, but my question, though, goes back to the RNC.
Yeah.
They didn't show any particular concern about even the slightest hint about a connection to Russia. That was even confirmed by a remark that Eric made out on the convention floor about them getting their money from Russia.
Right.
So the whole thing of it is, as far as I'm concerned, my opinion is, it goes right back to Reince Priebus. You can thank him for Donald Trump being in the White House.
Yeah, I can't dispute that.
Because who was Donald Trump's first chief of staff? Reince Priebus, and he was out of there in a month.
Yeah. And that would have been a political payback for, hey, thanks for shepherding my my nomination through. Makes sense.
So he was an enabler. So the question is, what did he get out of it?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good question. Ray, I don't know the answer to it, but it's a very good question. Thanks a lot for the call. Ken in Denver. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm a Patreon subscriber and also a Free Speech TV supporter, but I wanted to thank you. And being from Colorado, I wanted to thank Senator Bennett for speaking up yesterday.
Amen.
I wish he would have said more about Mitch McConnell and spoken up to him specifically. But I wanted to get your thoughts on why we're not picking apart what Trump is saying effectively enough, like in his news conference yesterday with his comments about that the unemployed, that they could just go to the grocery store and they'll take care of it, like anyone can walk into a grocery store and they'll give you a loan like it was the 1920s.
Yeah, that was the most amazing thing, you know, and it's just there is so much absurdity coming out that it's like the media is cutting him a pass on it. And apparently I did too. I didn't mention that this morning, and I should have. You know, Donald Trump in his press conference yesterday, or in his meeting with the press, in his conversation with the press, literally said these out of work government workers, the stores will work with them, the grocery stores will work with them. I'm sorry, the grocery stores aren't working with them. They never did, they never will. And you're absolutely right. It's obscene, the stuff that he's saying. And
yesterday he had also made a statement about criticizing, quote, socialism, and saying that those in the Congress that want to increase the high-end tax rate to 70%, that they would have to increase it another 70%.
Right.
Which doesn't make sense at all right there alone.
Yeah, there is no 140% tax. That's not even possible. You're right. And on top of that, he said basically that, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to turn us into Venezuela. And you can expect to hear that talking point a lot, by the way. It's going to be repeated over and over and over again by people on the hard right. The other thing that Trump said yesterday was that the reason why 6 Republicans, as Bernie was talking about at the beginning of the hour, the reason why 6 Republicans joined the Democrats in voting to open the government was because they needed the hurricane relief money that was in the bill. And those 6 Republicans, none of them are from states that were hit by hurricanes. I mean, it's just a flat out, blatant, lie. It's just. In fact, it was Claire McCaskill called him out on it. Apparently I don't still have that article in front of me. Claire McCaskill tweeted out going, come on, Utah, Romney's from Utah. He wants hurricane money. Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, hurricane money? No, it's not hurricane money. It's so anyway. Yeah.
One of them was Senator Gardner from Colorado. And, he supported Trump consistently and has not listened to his constituents. The other one was the Georgia senator who they say had concerns about the Super Bowl and opening up air traffic safety for the impending Super Bowl.
Right. Yeah, he must have heard about Joe Madison's idea. God bless Joe. He is so good. Ken, thanks for the call. Spot on. Fred in Los Angeles. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, this also goes to what this last caller was just talking about, which is something you touched on, but you did not go into detail, and maybe you don't know the details just yet. But is it unprecedented that the RNC has decided that there will be no primaries?
No, it's not unprecedented. The DNC did that in 2012 with Barack Obama. There was no primary challenge to Obama.
Maybe
or not 2012,
22.
Yeah, was that 2012 that he ran for re-election? Yeah, 2012. Yep. So no, it's not unprecedented. In fact, I think it's fairly common. And in the Democratic Party, conventional wisdom, and I would dispute this. I would say that it was Ronald Reagan's conspiracy with Iran to hold the hostages. But the conventional wisdom is that the reason Jimmy Carter lost his election in 1980, which put Ronald Reagan into the White House, was because Ted Kennedy had given a primary challenge to him, or tried to do a primary challenge to him at the convention, and a stop was put to it. But just that challenge was enough to significantly damaged Carter. Let's leave it at that.
I've heard that before too.
Yeah. So the Republicans don't want that to happen.
The Republican Party, Trump's party now, no matter what.
Yeah, no, they don't want that to happen. They figure, a bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. That they're going to take their their chances trying to get Trump reelected. At least he's got a strong level of support among a small, number of people, but it's his base. It's the Foxosphere, the Fox world. And that's what they're going to go for. Fred, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to us there in Los Angeles. James in Clear Oaks, California. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
So I read this headline this morning: Trump administration helps faith-based agencies block LGBT adoption.
Oh, geez.
The governor of South Carolina has got this waiver from requirements to require agencies that put kids up for adoption to consider LGBT parents or people who want to become parents. Now, this is a state that has the time and resources to be part of interstate cross-check, but is not in compliance with the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act of 2014, which is a bipartisan bill requiring states to pay very close attention to what happens to kids in foster care, because what happens when a kid in foster care gets recruited into the sex trafficking is that they have about 7 years to live after that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an actual crisis that apparently Republicans, for some reason, don't really care about too much.
No, they don't care about kids. They just care about billionaires' tax bills. I mean, this is the bottom line. And when it comes to, gay couples who are adopting, Republicans actually hate them. I mean, this is such an immoral, vicious administration, and not just Trump. I mean, this is the Republican Party, top to bottom, coast to coast. James, thank you for the call. This is the Republican Party. It is a party that is based on grab what you can, snatch and grab, loot the country on the one hand, and split people apart from each other by spreading hate on the other hand.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News in a few minutes, find out what's going on in the world, and then we'll be back with Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. And welcome back. Brenda, Newport News, Virginia. Hey, Brenda, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I know that a lot is going on today, and they're talking about Manafort and Stone. Stone being arrested, and then Manafort, they're saying that Mueller is not recommending leniency in his sentencing. But I wonder why there isn't more being said about the relationship with Trump politics and Manafort and Stone going all the way back to the 80s, because he had retained the powerful lobbying firm of Black, Manafort, and Stone right after it opened shop in 1980, and its three partners were Charles Black, Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone, and they had just played vital roles in Ronald Reagan's 1984 landslide victory, and Trump was at that time exploring politics, and oh, by the way, looked like he was making overtures to Russia and building a hotel in the 80s at the same time.
Yeah, and Manafort and Stone was also involved in the re-election campaign the election campaign, rather, of George Bush Sr. and the Willie Horton ad. What's his name? The guy who put the Willie Horton ad together worked for Manafort and Stone. And this association of Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, and going back to Reagan, is never mentioned in the media, and it should be. You're absolutely right, Brenda. This is a big deal.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. These guys have been doing this. They've been involved in this criminal conspiracy all the way back. I mean, just all the way back. Rich in Joliet, Illinois. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was watching Fox News earlier to see if they were covering what was going on with what's his name down in Florida.
And instead they're talking about a caravan, right?
Pardon me?
Instead they're talking about a caravan?
No, they were talking about the border. They were in a border town in a restaurant.
Bingo.
And they were talking with this couple, and the couple was talking about why we need the wall here because their neighbors got robbed, but the gentleman next to him goes, he goes, all the drugs are coming over in the backpacks, and that they're bringing over the drugs to give to the Negroes to sell to the white people. And the guy just sat there and looked at him like, oh, like it's normal, you know. And I was just astonished about the way they acted.
Wow.
Nobody, you know, was in an uproar or anything, or you know.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
And this is typically not live. I mean, they record that in that, you know, diner in Texas, and then they send it off to Fox in New York, where it gets edited. And if they've got a phrase like that, language like that, geez, that you know, wow. Rich, thanks for the heads up. I appreciate it. It's
keep up the good work.
Yeah. Hey, Rich, real quick question.
Sure.
Did Fox? You started out saying that when you tuned to Fox, you wanted to see if they were discussing anything having to do with Stone and all this kind of stuff. Was there any mention?
No. They were talking about drones flying and other things. A mail car going down the street that blew up. And it was on an icy road, and then it slid down the road, and it was on fire. Anything but that piece.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Rich, thanks a lot for the heads up. That's you got to pity the poor people who get their news from Fox News. You know, it's a network owned by a billionaire, and so it's only going to present information to people that is billionaire friendly. And right now, Trump is the billionaire in the White House. And so we've got to be friendly to that billionaire, too, because, hey, we're Fox News. We're here for the billionaires. We're owned by one. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week: 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. Luke is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, operating out of New York City, and you can find his podcast by plugging his name into your podcast provider. Luke, what's up in the world?
Well, it looks like the government shutdown could end within minutes, or at least the president is expected to give a speech in the Rose Garden in which he is going to possibly, and again, we're not 100% certain this is exactly what he's going to say, but he would basically back down on his demands that the government only reopen with money for a border wall, according to the New York Times. And I don't know if you've been covering this, but this is a deal which would see the government temporarily reopen for 3 weeks, during which time, evidently, we're going to finally all get along and agree on all the things we didn't disagree, all the things we disagreed about over the last few weeks, and actually hammer out some sort of deal on border security, but not do so in some sort of hostage, situation with the government still closed. So that's what we're expecting from the president. I must say, I saw you on Twitter engaging with someone yesterday saying, oh, this idea of a TSA general strike in Atlanta during the Super Bowl is like a terrific way of putting pressure on the government. It does appear airport operations may have been one of the sort of instigating factors here.
Oh, I think the breaking point was this morning when
Exactly.
when they shut down LaGuardia for an hour.
Yeah, right. And then also said they would have to be capping capacity at Newark and at Philadelphia Airport. The TSA, one of the unions, had been talking about an overall general strike in the coming days, not saying they were committed to it as a strategy, but giving some interviews in which they were sort of toying with that idea. So it appears that might have been the sort of spooking factor that called this off. I will say there really, I would also say the votes yesterday in the Senate, the competing votes, really, I think, confirmed also to the White House also what public opinion had been telling them for weeks, which is that, there's greater support, even among some Republicans now, for a Democratic move to reopen the government without the border wall funding than there was for the White House deal to swap border wall funding for some very scant immigration protections. And actually, you could argue sort of a backsliding on asylum policy. So they read the leaves, and evidently we're seeing some polls showing the president suffered as much as 5 to 6 percentage point popularity slide over the course of the shutdown. And I've seen even folks like Nikki Haley, the departed UN ambassador, taking to the press, in the last day, saying, look, this is dysfunctional and embarrassing. Democrats and Republicans need to sit down and reopen this government and shouldn't get paid until they do so. I think, the White House.
But the House has gone home. They won't be back in session until Tuesday of next week, maybe Monday if they called an emergency session. Or do you think that Nancy Pelosi is going to tell everybody to get on a plane and get back here?
I wonder. I mean, I know today was the deadline for the second paycheck for 800,000 federal employees. I'm not sure if we reopen on Sunday or whatever, how fast that can be processed. But I would not put it past Pelosi to respond to this quickly and to show that, if the president is going to take decisive action, she will take decisive action as well. I think we could see a scenario where people are called back.
Yeah. Interesting. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, we have 2 people claiming to be president. One who was elected, Maduro. The other, this 35-year-old right-wing guy, who has been recognized by the U.S. And what shocked me was Canada recognized him. What the hell is going on?
Well, the Juan Guaido, let's just be very clear here. So we're trying to determine who has a better claim on the presidency. Maduro points to an election that occurred last May, and Guaido says, no, the election that occurred last May was not legitimate. And in fact, if you have an absence of a legitimate election and no legitimate president, then per the Venezuelan constitution, power devolves to the National Assembly, which is the body that he is the president of. Having done some interviews on this over the last few days, it appears to me as if the constitutional case in Venezuela for Guaido is stronger. In order for the election last year, for the constitution in Venezuela to have been legitimate, it had to have been called for by the National Assembly, and it wasn't. Instead, Maduro created another parallel constituent assembly and made sure the rules were such that instead of the opposition being in the majority, his party would be in the majority. That is the body that called for the election. So per the Constitution, that election doesn't seem like it should have been legitimate. And again, when the presidential term expired for Maduro in early January and there was no elected president through a legitimate election, the power did go to the National Assembly. So that's the claim that Guaido has. I think that is something to keep in mind as we look through all of the actions that are happening now. If you consider Maduro to be the legitimate source of power, then any scenario in which a foreign troop might set foot in Venezuela or any foreign aid workers not given permission by him to do so, you could call it a military intervention. However, if you see Guaido as the legitimate president, that is in no way an intervention. It's an appeal for help. It's a very real possibility, given the fact that Maduro has called for the U.S. Personnel, not military, but political personnel, in Venezuela to evacuate, I believe by the end of tomorrow, that if they don't, the military could show up at the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. might get called in. But again, whether he's legitimate in giving orders or not changes whether that's an intervention or a rescue authorized by Guaido.
This could get very weird. Luke, have you seen the documentary Client 9 about Elliot Spitzer?
I have not.
It's Netflix took it down, but it's on Hulu and Amazon. If you want to know who Roger Stone really is, check that thing out.
Okay, doke.
Thanks a lot, Luke. Great talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com /Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on Election Day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier, he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor." Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week.
Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Don Cox.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. That was quite a conversation with Bernie in the last hour there about, what's going on in Washington, D.C. It looks like sometime in the next few minutes, Donald Trump, he's a half hour late, but surprise, surprise, build the suspense. Do it like reality TV. He's got his entire staff standing out in front of the White House waiting for the man, the president, to appear and make his appearance. The word is, what Luke Vargas, our reporter with Talk Media News, reported to us just 15 minutes ago, was that Trump is going to say, okay, I give. And that the breaking point, the thing that caused the White House to say, okay, we can't go any farther, is that they shut down LaGuardia for an hour this morning. And Philadelphia's airport and Newark are both experiencing flight delays because the air traffic controllers are not all showing up for work. And if they don't have enough controllers, they don't try to make the controllers that they have work harder because they're already maxed out. They're working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And, they don't just try to give them a larger workload. Instead, what they do is they reduce the workload to be appropriate to the number of controllers by telling airplanes that they can't take off. It's called a ground stop. And they did that for a full hour this morning out of LaGuardia. So it looks like, we've discovered the pressure point for Trump, whether it's the threat of the TSA walkout in Atlanta on the day after the Super Bowl that Joe Madison had proposed on his program and talked about here on this program yesterday, or whether it's the air traffic controllers. But he has broken the government, and it's going to last for a while. And apparently he's going to say, okay, you can reopen the government for 3 weeks while we'll negotiate these things, but I want my border wall at the end of the 3 weeks. And of course, then he'll just shut the government down all over again or whatever. But anyhow, that's what's going on. And in order to try to, back down on the TSA folks, keep in mind the TSA starting pay at the TSA is $25,000 a year. These people are not so well paid that they can easily take a month without a paycheck. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And so they're going to pay TSA agents who are working between December 23rd and January 5th. They're going to give them a week's worth of pay today, or maybe they already have. Meanwhile, Roger Stone was indicted this morning. Just a quick recap on what's going on. When you're remembering that Stone was indicted, remember that it was
Roger Stone who took down Al Franken. It was Roger Stone who took down Elliot Spitzer. Client 9 is the movie about that. It's a brilliant documentary. You can watch it on Hulu and Amazon. And Client 9 documents how Roger Stone was hired by an angry New York billionaire that Elliot Spitzer was prosecuting or investigating, specifically to take down Spitzer. And Stone committed a number of federal crimes in the process of doing that, brags about them in the documentary, which documents Stone's crimes. Stone was Manafort's business partner back in the 80s. They worked on the Reagan re-election campaign in 1984 together. Stone Manafort was part of the name of the firm. The Stone Manafort had hired Lee Atwater, and they put together the Willie Horton ads in 92, in 88 for George Herbert Walker Bush, for Jr. But he also took down Al Franken. After Al Franken took down Jeff Sessions by grilling him about his Russia conflicts, Roger Stone was clearly pissed off about this. Because Mueller got appointed as a result of the way that Franken was interrogating Jeff Sessions. He forced Sessions to recuse himself, and therefore we got Mueller. Stone was upset about that, and he tweeted that Al Franken's time in the barrel was coming. And shortly thereafter, allegations of sexual harassment against Franken, as Tommy Carcetti writes on DU, centering on a decades-old joke photograph and a few other vague accusations arise. Right. And I mean, it's just like, oh, and the other thing is, you'll remember that the day that WikiLeaks, apparently in coordination with Roger Stone, October 7th of 2016, the day that WikiLeaks dropped the first batch of John Podesta emails was the same day that the Access Hollywood tape came out, October 7th, 2016. So the Access Hollywood tape comes out, inhales, consumes the news media news cycle, and so immediately WikiLeaks, the Julian Assange and company, releases this thing. I've been asking the question, now that it looks like fairly clear that the Trump presidency is only exists as a consequence of a criminal conspiracy, is it possible that the Clinton campaign or any American could sue for fraud before the Supreme Court and have Trump and Pence basically removed from office, which would put Nancy Pelosi into the White House, or Hillary and Tim Kaine? I don't know, but it's something worth examining and questioning, and nobody has called to contest this and say, no, that's not possible. The RNC, by the way, their resolutions committee just passed a unanimous resolution to say that they're not going to have a primary this year. Donald Trump is going to be their nominee. It's getting weird. It's getting very, very weird. Elizabeth Warren has proposed a tax on wealth owned, if you own more than $50 million worth of assets every year. She wants the government to take a little piece out of that, 1 or 2%. I think that that's a great idea. We've got to do something about this. And wow, it's just, there's so much going on. I guess that's a pretty good summary. So we'll pick up your phone calls here. It's Anything Goes Friday. Steve in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Hey, Steve, thanks for listening to SiriusXM.
Hey.
What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, thank you, Steve.
Nice segue with the Senator Warren this morning. We took note of her offer and thought that maybe we could talk to you about upping the ante a little bit. She certainly is correct about money in politics, and I know you more than anybody has talked about the damage that it continually does to us. Last fall, we put up a website, and the website for you and for your listeners is whywouldyouvote.com, whywouldyouvote.com. And up on that website, Tom, what we've done is we've asked everybody to answer a very, very simple question for us and maybe to take a look at this issue, and that's this: why would you ever vote for a rich person?
Interesting. Yeah, I see. I'm looking at your website. Why would you ever vote for a rich person? In the conversation. Let's start That's fascinating. That's cool.
I think, Tom, it's the way. I think we're never going to break Citizens United with a vote, and I don't think Elizabeth can get this bill passed with the makeup. And she talks about changing the structure, but to change the structure, you have to change the people.
Yeah.
So bottom line is, and I think AOC is right, and I think the Democrats have partially proved it with the amount of people we've put out there who have not taken corporate money, that we don't need corporate money to elect people, and we basically don't need rich people to represent us.
There you go. I agree. Steve, thanks for the heads up on that, and I'll tweet your website out when I get off the air. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Yeah, how you doing? I want to come in with a little Malcolm X. You know, he said we've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, and led astray, which the American people have for the past 39, almost 40 years with this trickle-down economic economy. And what we have to remember is its philosophy. This philosophy was less is more. I remember that, man. In other words, they're telling you 5 plus 3 equal 8 is actually more than 5 take away 3 is 2. They convinced the American people that less is more. That's why we come with this other insane thing. Corporations are people, my friend.
Right.
Now, can the corporation vote? What kind of corporation do that compared to a human? And what is the corporation? The people inside, the paperwork, or the building?
Yeah.
Who? Man, and we've been tricked this long for the past 39 years, and we now have to get our sanity back and get rid of this trickle-down economic.
I agree with you, Maine, and you know we've talked. You and I have talked, and I've talked in general on this program over the years about how it was the Great Depression that created the space, that moved the Overton window, as it were, that created the space for a conversation about high taxes on great wealth and the ability of people to unionize and taking on big corporations and the economic royalists. And I, in fact, I wrote a book about this, The Crash of 2016, speculating that another crash would be the necessary thing to bring about the kind of conversation that you and I are having right now, Maine, the things that you're talking about in a really big way in the United States. I think that crash is still coming. I don't think that 2008 has ever been resolved. I think the entire world right now is hanging on tenterhooks. But beyond that, we're looking right now at a political crash, you know, basically Donald Trump taking apart the government and you know, destroying our country. And everybody is starting to get it. And so I think that, you know, the damage that this incompetent, narcissist guy in the White House is doing is creating the space for people like you, Maine, who are talking about this, for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and for others on the progressive.
Oh, yeah, that Cortez. Oh, man, she's beautiful.
Yeah, she is. She is spectacular. You know, she's too young to run for president. If she was over 35, I'd be calling for her to run for president in this cycle. She is really good, and one day that woman is going to be president of the United States. Maine, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con in conservative. And welcome back. Monique in Seattle, listening on KBCS. Hey, Monique, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's nice to talk with you. I've listened to you for a long time, but I've never called the show.
Well, thank you for calling.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to poke a little deeper with you on this issue of, you know, our elected representatives, particularly presidents who come from wealthy families. And I've heard you talk about how some of them are sort of taught to use their power for good and sort of, you know, benevolence, and then others, like our current president, not so much. But I think we just have to also really look at, I mean, even those folks, the way that they made their money, right, the spoils of capitalism, they then have to come back into office and try to correct the ills that were created by them earning their money the way that they did. So I just... Well,
hang on just a second, Monique. Yes and no. Joe Kennedy making money on, you know, by having a fleet of boats that moved bootleg booze across Lake Erie back during Prohibition, didn't create a corrupt political system or a corrupt economic system. He exploited it. So to say that, you know, the Kennedy family or even the Rockefeller family created these problems, I think is mixing up causation with correlation.
Well, I think they perpetuate, though. I mean, I guess my point is just I think that we need to really take a careful examination of capitalism in this country, and as a root cause of so many of the ills that even the people that we can get excited about electing and, you know, want to do good by us and want to improve things and are progressive You know, I'm just not convinced, you know, we can get there.
No, I agree with you broadly speaking in your critique of capitalism, and you know, I am not a fan of unregulated capitalism, and I think that, you know, we need to cut capitalism down to about 20% of what it is at the very least, which is pretty radical. You know, an 80% cut in the power of capital in this country. But I am a fan of free enterprise, of entrepreneurialism. But to say that somebody has a position that they acquired by virtue of something that wasn't their own, you know, hard work or whatever, and therefore they should not be allowed to use that position to do something good, is for me kind of scary talk. I mean, I'm doing this show because of the benefits of white and male privilege that I had my whole entire life. I was able to build businesses back when, you know, if you looked in the papers for jobs for women, they were all secretaries and you know, teachers. As a man, as a white man, I was able to make a good living, to provide for my family, but you know, led right to this show. And so should I not have this show because of white privilege? I mean, it's sort of like, you know, should Jack Kennedy have not had been president because of the privilege of wealth that his father brought to his family? I can't go there.
Hear you. I think it's just, and I'll just quickly say this, and then because I don't want to belabor the point, but you know, for example, when Warren Buffett, you know, decided to give a good portion of his wealth to the Gates Foundation, right. I mean, I just don't think two white men should have that much power over what happens.
I absolutely
to the rest
agree.
Of the world.
And Anand Giridharadas, or however you say his name, has written an absolutely brilliant book about that, about, you know, the philanthropy thing. But if somebody wants to do good, I mean, it's sort of like, you know, the Christians right now, the hardcore right-wing Christians are saying, you know, we know Trump isn't a Christian, but we'll take whatever he gives us. And I'm inclined to say something similar to that on the left. You know, if Ted Kennedy was still around, you know, or even Nelson Rockefeller, well, not Nelson, you get my point. Monique, I'm running out of time here. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or, you know, anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need, and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Donald Trump announcing that he's got a deal. Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell have worked out a program to reopen the government. And they're going to pass it. They're going to push it through the Senate. Then the House is going to come back, and blah, 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 blah. And Trump is trying to take credit for being the great deal maker. You know, he broke it. Now he's going to say, "Oh, I fixed it. Isn't that wonderful?" Okay, Gail in Seattle. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. One of the many things I'm concerned about is the brazen United States support for the apparent coup in Venezuela. And I would have liked to have asked Bernie this, but I'll ask you. Do you think there would be support in Congress for a resolution of non-intervention in Venezuela?
I doubt most Americans are paying any attention to it. So, no, I would guess that probably there isn't, although there certainly should be. Or at least there's not enough public support, there's not enough public pressure that's probably going to happen. But you do have some good members of Congress, including some Republicans like Justin Amash and others, who are very, very skeptical of U.S. involvement in foreign entanglements, you know, who take seriously George Washington's farewell address and would say no. And I would hope that they prevail. We'll have to keep an eye on it. Gail, thanks for the call. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Dr. Tom.
One of the things that's been bothering me about this shutdown is this is a long-range plan to get rid of federal employees, permanently salaried federal employees.
Yeah, this is what Bernie and I were talking about in the last hour.
Well, I didn't wake up in time.
Okay. Well, I said, I asked him right up front. I said, I'm seeing in the right-wing media and these right-wing websites and whatnot, I am seeing commentators saying that, what Donald Trump is doing by shutting down the government is exactly what needs to be done. We're more than a month into this, 1/12 of the year without the federal government basically functioning, and the world has not ended. And this is proof that we can cut the government in half or even smaller, and which they've been advocating since the 30s. And
well, if you take away salaried employees, this also affects their credit rating.
Yes.
First of all, they can lose their houses, and we have another credit housing crisis.
Well, you've got FBI agents all over the country who are losing their security clearances because they're not making their mortgage payments.
That's right. And you see, this is the same thing that if you get rid of salaried employees in one field in the middle class, and then you get rid of another one, eventually there will not be a middle class in the United States.
That's right.
This is what they're trying to do with the post office. Are people adding up what they'd have to pay the post office to get their mail? That would take about $7 million a month. Wait a minute, let me check my figures. That would take about $7 billion a month, $7 million a month out of the country for people to have paid a private company to have their mail delivered.
Yeah.
Then if you look at what has been done with the health insurance, that is the one that's taking the $7 billion a month out of the country.
Yep.
And so if this continues on and you only have the rich, then we have the rich and the poor only, no middle class, the country fails completely. And I don't know what you're seeing, but I'm seeing a lot of angry people. I am doing my best to keep people from posting guillotines, the gallows, the firing squads, the pitchforks. And now the one I'm trying to say, please don't post, is eat the rich. And how much soup can you make out of the 26 billionaires?
Well, Wilbur Ross really had, how much soup can you make? That's a good one. Wilbur Ross really had a Marie Antoinette moment yesterday. Both him and Larry Kudlow, coming out and saying, or Larry Kramer, no, it's Kudlow, Kramer's the other guy. Saying that Kramer was saying, well, these people who are showing up for work without pay are doing so because they're so loyal to Donald Trump. And then, Wilbur Ross saying, well, I don't understand why they can't just ask Daddy for a loan or go to the bank. And then Donald Trump comes on TV and says, well, if these federal employees just go to the supermarket will work with them. And I don't think anybody told Safeway that, Norma.
Well, I don't think anybody's told Publix down here either. But if you have people who are now saying, eat the rich, and figuring out how much soup you can make every day out of these 600 families that are so filthy rich, and you have a group that is really angry, and I can't keep these people calm. I'm just one little old woman down here in the South.
Well, I think we're on the edge of a revolution here, Norma. I don't think it's going to be a shooting revolution, but I think we're on the edge of a serious political revolution.
Well, I am afraid of these people getting on the street, because if they go out and they riot and they have shooting the way they've had in Venezuela, and France 24 did a much better piece on how many people have been killed, how many have been arrested. Right. But if we have people in the streets, our so-called president would, that thing in the White House.
Right, he'd declare a state of emergency. Yeah, you're right. Norma, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but all great points. It's always great to hear from you, Norma. Thank you. Very well said. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. 28 minutes past the hour. Trump has capitulated, at least for 3 weeks.
Our book today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate President Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter of American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America could face for decades to come.
Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through kickbacks and bribes and slush funds, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, such as Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, a groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as a special counsel investigates whether a president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning rather than the end of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there is the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of American political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease the sanctions on Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment in Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump's family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired two former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andrus, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact has to be contained overseas. If a corporation pays big kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and a constant migration of people, goods, and capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are often difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars of fines and penalties. Not to mention a reputation that will be associated forever with corruption and deceit. The firms also effectively steal the public's money, because the majority of bribery cases involve a capital-intensive deployment in infrastructure projects, such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining, that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year Although this may represent the high end, others have placed the amount at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. Bribery is not just a matter of money, however. It almost always involves power as well. The actual payments are the manifestation of a secretly collusive system that for most of modern history, corporations have been forging with foreign government officials around the globe. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Donald Trump is reading a Stephen Miller, no doubt, written speech about how the people trying to come into the United States, whose skin is a little darker than his, are drug-infested, lice-infested, disease-carrying, honest to God, disease-carrying, brutal, evil murderers and thugs, and oh my God, be afraid, be very afraid. And all the networks are carrying it, of course. At least all the cable TV networks. I don't have the the big three on. And it is sick and twisted stuff. And I know that for people who watch Fox News all day long and listen to Right Wing Hate Radio, it's absolutely consistent with the message that they believe and that they fills their world. But for the rest of us, I hope that this over-the-top rhetoric that Trump is using is going to cause more and more people to go, huh? You know, the border crossings are actually way, way down. We're at a low we haven't seen since like 1977. I mean, it's the lowest it's been in decades, people coming into the United States illegally. And most of the people who are coming here are surrendering once they get here because they want asylum. They're refugees. These are not people who are looking for economic opportunity. Mexico's economy is actually doing quite well right now. So anyhow, he's using this speech occasion apparently to give his State of the Union address because this was not a 5-minute. We've come to an agreement with Chuck and Mitch. Nancy Pelosi is saying we'll see what they have, right? I mean, the devil's in the details. She has not seen the legislation that Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer have worked out apparently. And Trump, of course, is taking credit for it and doing his rant about these evil brown-skinned people who want to come to the United States. Tim in Milwaukee. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for enlightening all of us. I think
you're welcome. Tim, can you get your mouth closer to the microphone, please? It sounds like you're talking from a toilet stall.
Yeah, sorry. Hold on one second. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I love AOC. I think she's got great ideas and is the future of the party. But we can't be talking about a 70% tax increase on the wealthy, as much as anybody who knows their history knows that it was even higher than that in the 50s and 60s.
And the 30s and the 40s and the 70s and the early 80s.
Of course, right. And I know that because of you and doing my homework. Most people don't know that. I think it's imperative that we just, I don't want to say start so low that it doesn't help us, but how about as I understand it, investment people only pay 17%. I'd love to see 15%. AOC or anybody running for, how much is it?
15% is the top tax income tax rate for people like Mitt Romney.
Yeah, I'm paying 33.
Yeah.
Let's get it up to that at least. But I think when you say tax the rich at 70%,
See, I see 70% as a compromise, Tim. We had a 91% top income tax rate during World War I, and throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and up until the mid-60s, and then it was dropped down to 74%, which is still higher than 70%, in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. Reagan didn't take that down until 82, I think he got it down to 50%, and then in 85 or 86, he got it down to 25%. But I
can't disagree with you.
I think 70% is a modest proposal, frankly, and it's also lower than a lot of other countries around the world for the top end of wealth, of income. And one of the most important points, Tim, is that when you look at countries' economic stability over time, what you find is that countries that have a top tax rate over 50% tend not to have severe boom and bust cycles in their economies. Countries that have a top tax rate under 50% suffer terribly severe boom and bust cycles. And that's why we didn't have that kind of cycle in a big way from the 1940s right through the 1980s, and then they started up in a big way in the 80s and 90s when the top tax rate went down because inequality just exploded. Other countries are dealing with this. The United Kingdom and the United States are not. So, Tim, respectfully, I understand what you're saying, but I think that we really need to start there. Tim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Detroit Johnny in Taylor, Michigan. Hey, Johnny, what's up?
Hi, Thomas. Professor, I got some really scary mail the other day. Coalition to Guarantee Social Security. Urgent call to action. Trump campaign pledge. I will do everything in my power to not touch your Social Security. Have you ever heard about this stuff? It's a citizen. It's called Coalition of Guaranteed Social Security.
Right.
CO Christian Seniors Association.
Yeah, Johnny, I don't know about that, and your voice is fading in and out. I don't know about that particular group, but I do know that ever since the 70s, bankers, New York bankers, have been funding right-wing groups. Pete Peterson is probably the most famous, the Peterson Foundation or Institute. He himself was a billionaire who made his money on Wall Street. And they're all looking at that $1 trillion, that $2.6 trillion sitting in the Social Security Trust Fund and thinking, if I could take 1% of that, or even 1/10 of 1% of that, I'd never have to work again in my life, and neither would my great-grandchildren. And so there has been this effort for decades to say that we need to privatize Social Security. It's going broke. It's a Ponzi scheme, to quote, Mike Pence and Ted Cruz. And it's a scam. I mean, the only reason they're doing this is because these bankers want this money, and that's the only reason that they're doing it. So beware. And thanks for the heads up. I mean, everybody needs to be careful. Pay very careful attention to the stuff you're getting in the mail and to the pitches you're getting. And when somebody comes on and says, "Oh, I'm so worried about Social Security," check their credentials. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Ironically, I'm in my van with a new freshly painted sign that says that I am proud of you, and I'm on my way down to the Air Traffic Control Center down just south of Seattle. I'm an ex-air traffic controller fired by Patco, and I'm just going to I'm going to give them my support. And
Good on you,
also have some information. Speaking about Patco, they sort of maneuvered us to go out on strike. They wanted to beat up labor, and clearly part of their goal was to shut down unions and to shut down everything else. So a lot of the theories and what people are thinking of the goals behind Trump, behind this whole thing, behind McConnell, I don't think that we can be suspicious enough. I think there's something lurking. They want to do something, even though there's allegedly a change here. And I would like to point out, and you're the only person who I have heard mention Steve Bannon. It is his and Grover Norquist's dream that this is happening.
Yeah, Steve Bannon said he wanted to deconstruct the administrative state. That's the quote from him. And what that means is, fire half the federal workers. I mean, that's how you deconstruct the administrative state, which is sort of what Trump just did. I mean, it wasn't half, it was a little less than half, but still, it's a big first step. And by the way, the other Steve Bannon news is that he's mentioned several times in Mueller's indictment of Roger Stone.
Yeah. So anyways, there is something dark behind all this, and we have to keep our awareness of it.
I agree.
And,
they want to privatize the FAA too, Robin.
What's that?
They want to privatize the FAA too.
Oh, exactly. That's exactly what they wanted to do with the Patco strike. Exactly.
Yep.
And so one of the things that I'm finding going on right now is that the air traffic controllers are getting a slightly better image than we had. For understandable reasons, we broke the law and whatever. But what also came out in, I believe, studies after the Patco strike was that there is kind of a deep-seated feeling in the country that federal or government employees are sort of second-class citizens. I think it's kind of a power thing. I think that if people pay taxes, they say, well, I'm in charge of this person or whatever it might be. And I am really hoping and asking and just have my fingers crossed that that the sensitivities and the care that we're seeing for government employees right now will really will nullify what I just shared with you.
Yeah, I hope that that's the case too. And Robin, for our listeners who are younger than you and I, who don't know what we're talking about, in 1980, the Reagan campaign cut a deal with PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, the union for the air traffic controllers, that PATCO would endorse Reagan for president, and in exchange for that, Reagan would allow PATCO to engage in a limited strike in order to highlight the need for better pay and more workers hired, but most importantly for upgrading the equipment in the air traffic control system. PATCO went out on, Trump became president with PATCO's endorsement. PATCO went out on strike, and did I say Trump? And Reagan fired them all. And that was the kicking off of his presidency, and it was also the kicking off of this campaign to destroy unionization in the United States. At that point in time, in 1981, when Reagan did that, in January of 1981, you had, as I recall, you had about a third of American workers were unionized, which meant about 2/3 of American workers, because the local unions would set the wage floor, about 2/3 of American workers had the equivalent of a good union job. They had good pay, they had a pension, they had health care, they could take a couple of weeks of vacation every year, they had a high enough income that a single person could raise a family, all that stuff. And the Reagan campaign, funded by the billionaires of that day, the whole goal of it was to destroy that middle class, and that's what they have done. So, Robin, I tip my hat to you as a guy who was part of that group, a member of PATCO at the time, and in particular that you're going out to, with a sign that says, "I'm proud of you," to the people who are working now in those control towers. Good on you, Robin. Did I summarize that accurately, by the way?
You summarized that absolutely perfectly. And all I have to say is, the left needs to know that our opposition is nefarious. Nothing happens by accident. They plan these things decades and decades ahead, and we have to remain persistent. We have to just stand up for each other. Yep. And now is a great time in our history for people to stand up for people. I hope that they do. And I also, on the side, hope that we review Native America, because that's where the first violation occurred.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Great to hear from you. I appreciate it. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The home of the political revolution. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and billionaires would really rather you didn't know. And welcome back. Read here. Let's see here. Whoop, no, Michael's listening. Here we go. Will in Brick, New Jersey. Hey, Will, thanks for listening to WBAI. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I've been listening the past few days and some of the discussion, and it is overwhelming how much the American worker has to take on, and how they're being attacked lately. But the 2 points I wanted to make, actually, is I think the TSA is they're not the only ones that are being affected. And
sure,
people seem to be relying on the TSA to take some action, like the TSA should be the only ones to, for lack of other words, rise up and make a stand. I mean, I think they're putting their necks on the line, honestly.
I agree, Will, but here's the problem. If the FBI can't do their job, and the FBI Agents Association, FBIAA.org, published a report about this earlier in the week, how they can't do their job. Most people, their lives aren't affected by that. But you've got a couple million people a day who move through the airspace of the United States. And when those people are inconvenienced in a big way, whether it's by TSA or whether it's by the air traffic controllers, I think, frankly, it was the air traffic controllers that brought Trump to his knees this morning by shutting down LaGuardia for an hour. When that happened, I think that was the tipping point. I don't know of any other federal workers who are in a position to leverage their job in a way that is so big and splashy that the American people would go, whoa! I mean, can you think of another group, Will?
Well, what I'm thinking is that there are more people affected than the federal government or the federal workers. There are a lot. All the workers of America are being affected.
You're right.
And they're just quiet. There's more. I think there needs to be more of a grassroots action and not depend on just the federal workers. All workers are being affected. The other point I wanted to make was the guest yesterday that brought up how Trump is waving the wall in one hand, but yet he's doing so many other things in regards to not allowing people to become citizens, not moving people through the courts, not well, the other point there, and I think it's dangerous to only worry about that because those are voters. They're potential future voters. We fall right into the hands, and that gives them the ammunition to say the only reason why they worry about these people is because they want them to be future voters.
Oh, you're talking about Greg Palast's point, yeah.
Well, what I believe is that so many people are being inundated every day through the course of action that Trump has taken that we don't have to depend on the future voters that are going to be naturalized.
I get it, and I agree with you, Will. And there's a lot of other good reasons to to increase the number of immigrants coming into this country. Immigration produces a vitality in a culture and an economy, and we need that. Cliff, thank you for the call, for a very thoughtful perspective. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, happy Friday.
Thanks, back at you.
All right. Well, the question is, why do we have to wait for the Mueller investigation to initiate any impeachment and corrective action against Trump and company? When you look at through the day-to-day coverage, I'm seeing crimes committed that's not even Russia-related. It could be related to Russia.
Oh, look at the Stormy Daniels thing, Michael. I mean, can you imagine if Obama had tried something like that?
But then look at recently with the Cohen situation, Cohen saying that he and his family threatened by Trump and Giuliani, and
witness tampering.
And then you had a congressman that was just on earlier today connecting this to the Godfather, where these people are operating like mafia mob life.
Yeah.
I mean, witness tampering, that's a crime. Forcing people to work without pay, that's a crime. The federal civil rights violations, count after count after count. That is a crime also. So I would say just start with the proceedings now. The evidence will definitely come forth as we continue on. But, there's going to have to come a time where people have to put their foot down and say, no more, enough is enough. You are not king. You are not emperor. You took an oath. You can't abide by the oath. Get the hell out of office.
Yep. I'm with you, Michael. And I think that there are more than enough documented actual high crimes. And a high crime is a crime that involves your office, by the way. It's not, some severe felony. It's a crime that you committed in the context of your office or acquiring that office. And there are enough high crimes and misdemeanors and not to mention, treason and other things, that Trump is imminently impeachable right now. I'm with you. Jeff in Mount Hope, Wisconsin. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, bud.
Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to point out when we're talking about marginal tax rates at 70%.
Mm-hmm.
We should explain that if an employer or a business wants to reduce that marginal tax rate down from 70%, they need to reinvest their money in a machine, a building, hiring more employees. There's a whole host of things that go along with what
and
they
pay their
do to
workers
reduce
better
that.
too. I mean, this is how a 74% tax rate worked in the from the 1930s to the 1980s. It caused employers to say, okay, if I'm going to have to pay 74% taxes on income over $3 million, I'm only going to take a $3 million paycheck. And that's, by the way, what the average CEO was only taking 30 times what the average worker was making. The workers were making 30 grand. The CEOs are making $3 million, and that was it. I mean, after that, it was like, okay, we'll pay more money to the workers. We'll pay, we'll reinvest in the company. Spot on, Jeff. Spot on. Very well said. Thank you. Trucker Jack in Ashdown, Arkansas. Am I saying that right, Jack?
Yeah, Tom. Another very edifying show, as usual.
Thank you.
Jeff was just echoing what I was going to bring up to that other caller earlier, that the higher tax rates help to fight corporate greed, do they not?
They do.
They help to incentivize a company to, reinvest in safety and health of the workers and the public, and research and development expansion, renewable resources, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And if you look at the history of the United States, the economic history of the United States, what you find is that the period from the 1930s until the 1980s was when we were building. It's when everything you walk into, Sam Walton's store said 100% made in America. You walked into a store, you found stuff made by Americans. Companies were building factories. They were employing people. They were paying people well. And you could buy a washing machine and know it was good for 30 years, or a toaster, or whatever it may be. And then we got this neoliberalism out of Ronald Reagan, this change in trade policies. Arguably it was started by Nixon trying to open us to China, although that was something he was doing because Pepsi was paying him. But, and it really didn't stick, but it opened the door for Reaganism. And then, of course, in the 90s, it got, went on steroids with NAFTA and with the WTO and all this stuff. And China now is the largest consumer market in the world, in addition to being the largest exporter in the world. And we have ceased to be, it used to be that we made things in this country and we sold them all over the world. Now we just import things. We have become essentially a third world country. We export raw materials, we are in debt, and we import finished goods. That's what third world countries do. We used to export finished goods, import raw materials, and be a net creditor to the world. We were in 1980 when Reagan came in. More countries owed us money than we owed them. That has completely flipped upside down. Jack, thanks so much for the call. You said it so well. Wow, what a day. I guess the good news is that the air traffic controllers, in my opinion, the air traffic controllers and the TSA guys backed down Trump, or Nancy Pelosi backed down Trump, or you helped back down Trump if you had called one of your senators and gave them holy hell. That's a good thing. Now we've got a 3-week hold your breath as the Trump reality TV show rolls on. Anyhow, have a great weekend, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs you. Tag you're it. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.